Hello friends! We're counting down to the holidays with 12 days of Christmas drawings. The goal of this mini-series is to kickstart a daily habit of painting in Procreate in a fun, low-pressure way. So I invite you to grab your pencil, get comfy, and draw along with me. Today we're painting this charming snow globe. Let's first create a new canvas, and I have mine set to 4,250 pixels wide by 3,200 pixels tall at 300 dpi. These are essentially the dimensions of the iPad, so the canvas should fit your screen. If you don't have enough storage on your iPad for a file this large, you can use the pre-formatted screen size canvas, which will give you the same aspect ratio, but at a smaller size and lower resolution. Here's a look at my sketching process. I use the 6B pencil brush, and you're welcome to draw your own snow globe in a different style or shape, or you can skip the sketching process altogether because I created a template for you which you can use as a guide for the painting. There's a link in the description for the free download. And I just want to mention, with the downloads, you'll also receive a color palette which you can import directly into Procreate. The palette includes the base colors that I'll be using, but you'll often see me incorporate other colors as well. Feel free to add to or adjust the base palette as you see fit. I'm going to use the template instead of my sketch, so let's import that. Go to the Actions menu, tap Add, tap Insert a Photo, and if you downloaded the template, it should be saved to your camera roll. Tap to import. Go to the template layer, tap N, change the blending mode to multiply, then reduce the opacity so the template is transparent. Create a new layer and drag it below the template. The first thing we're going to do is add a little color to the background. Open the brush library, go to the watercolors set, and we're going to use Bing Along Bay. Now choose the grayish blue from the palette and make sure the brush size is set all the way up to 100%. We're going to paint a light wash behind the snow globe. Now you don't want the shape to be too uniform, so don't make a circle or anything. Just try to make it as natural as possible. Let's add a little extra color to this area that will be inside the snow globe. All right, now let's switch to the main brush we'll be using throughout the tutorial. Go back to the brush library, find the pastels set, and we're going to use Purple Star. Now let's create a new layer and make sure that it's above the watercolor wash. And let's stick to the grayish blue color. Make the brush size quite small, about 5 or 6%, and we're going to draw the outline of the dome. When you're drawing long curves like this, it's easier if you use your entire arm rather than trying to draw from the wrist. Turn off your template temporarily to check how your line looks and make any adjustments if you need to. If everything looks okay, turn it back on and then change the color to white. We're just going to paint that dome highlight on the same layer. Don't forget to turn off the template to check that as well. Clean up or adjust the shape if you need to. All right, turn the template back on, then create a new layer. This time we're going to choose a spruce green from the palette, and we're going to outline the entire shape of the snow globe base. Start with the brush at a fairly small size so it's easier to control when drawing these smaller angles. I've got mine set at about 6%. And then I usually increase the brush size a bit to thicken that outline. And then I usually increase the size even more to fill so that I get that really nice texture. We also used a pastel brush for the snowman tutorial, but this one has a much finer grain, so it has a different look to it and it's a little smoother. Now we're going to create a new layer and make it a clipping mask. Then switch to the holly green from the palette. We'll use this darker green to add a little shading and definition to that base. You can keep your strokes light and loose for this lower section, and then drop the brush size down to do these smaller areas. When the base is done, create a new layer. Choose the light green from the palette, and we're going to use this color to paint these two large leaves. Start by outlining those shapes, Then increase the brush size and fill manually. I've mentioned this in another video, but the reason we're filling manually instead of using the drop fill feature is because we want to preserve the texture of the brush. Now let's create a darker version of that green and add a few lines to the center of those leaves. I'm doing this on the same layer, by the way. When those are done, create a new layer, change the color to the red from the palette, and we're going to paint the poinsettia next. So outline that shape, then increase the brush size to fill manually. Now let's create a new layer and make it a clipping mask. Switch to the deep red, and with the brush at a relatively small size, add a line of shadow where each of those petals overlap. I'm going to turn off my template for a second because now we can increase the brush size and add a little textured shading as well. And we're just going to use a light touch to get a more grainy look. Now you can turn the template back on, create a new layer, and choose a nice golden yellow. Go ahead and paint those buds in the center. Now we're going to paint the pine needles, but they need to be behind the poinsettia. So create a new layer, then drag it below those 3 poinsettia layers. Choose holly green from the palette, and your brush size should still be fairly small after drawing those little yellow dots. And we're just going to use a few light strokes to paint these pine needles. All right, we've already got quite a few layers here, so let's create a few groups to keep them organized. So let's first select the leaves, pine needles, and poinsettia layers, and group those. Then name that group if you'd like. Then select the snow globe base and its clipping mask. Group those and name that group as well. Okay, that's a bit more manageable. Now we can create a new layer and let's drag it below the group with the snow globe base. Then choose white. Increase the brush size to about 25% and first outline the hill in the foreground. Then bump the size up even higher to manually fill that area so the nice texture shows through. All right, create a new layer, then drag it below the foreground hill. Switch to the red from the palette, and we're going to paint the cabin. We'll paint the roof in a different color in a second. Right now, we're just focusing on this part of the structure. When that's done, you can switch to the eraser tool, also set to purple star, and erase some of that red that's showing through in the background. By the way, since we used the brush at a large size and took advantage of that texture, we are getting this really nice effect that makes the snow look light and fluffy. All right, now let's change the color to the deep red from the palette, drop the brush size all the way down to about 3%, and we're going to paint those lines on the cabin to represent wood planks. These are going to go all the way across the entire width of the cabin, and they don't need to be perfectly straight. Now we can switch colors to paint the roof. Create a new layer, and make sure it's above the cabin layer. Then choose whatever color you want to use for the roof. I'm going to use this light brown kind of tan color. When you're painting the roof, just make sure to overlap the red slightly so there are no gaps between the two colors. Actually, I think I'll turn my template off so I can see this more clearly. And then I can quickly fill that area. Next, you can drop the brush size all the way down to about 2% to paint the window frames and the door. Now remember, this is a textured brush, so at a small size like this, you may need to go over your lines a few times to fill in the open spaces between the grain and make it look more solid. I think I'm going to change the shape of my door and make it round at the top instead of a regular rectangle. We're doing this on the same layer as the roof, by the way. All right, those are done. Now let's go to that layer with the roof, windows, and door and turn on Alpha Lock. Create a darker version of whatever color you used for the roof, and add a line of that darker color along the edge of the roof, just so it doesn't look so flat. You can also add a shadow to the door, and I'm going to give it a little doorknob too. Now let's add a different color to the inside of those windows to create some depth. So go back to the cabin layer, switch to the deep red from the palette, then paint the inside of each of those windows. Then you can add a line of shadow under the roof. Let's turn the template back on, select the two cabin layers and group them. Now create a new layer and drag it below the cabin group. Change the color to white. With the brush size set at about 25%, outline the curve of the background hill and then thicken that line with a couple strokes. Then you can increase the brush size so you get a much larger grain and use the light strokes so it creates a really textured effect. You might need to turn the template off again to get a better sense of how it's coming together. What we're trying to do is create a nice transition from solid white at the top of the hill to more grainy at the bottom, with some of the blue background showing through. And that's just going to help create some visual separation between the two hills. As you can see, we've now painted over part of the dome, so let's fix that. Go to that dome layer, then drag it up to position it right below the group with the snow globe base. Now go back to the background hill layer, switch to the eraser tool, and erase those areas that fall outside of the dome shape. Let's turn the template back on, create a new layer, drag it below the background hill. Choose the bright green from the palette, and paint that first tree behind the cabin. You can start with an outline and then increase the brush size to fill. Then create a darker version of that green to add the details and shading. When you're done with that tree, create a new layer and make sure it's below the background hill. Switch to the spruce green and paint the second tree. Then you can switch to the holly green from the palette to add the details. Create a new layer for the third tree, and we're going to continue using holly green. Then you can paint the branches on that bare tree. I've got my brush size all the way down to about 3% for this. Okay, just 2 more small trees. Create 1 more new layer, switch to the bright green from the palette, and these trees are going to be in front of both hills, so drag that new layer above the foreground hill layer. We can paint those tiny trees with just a few simple strokes. The last thing we need to do is add the snow. Create a new layer, and it can stay here below the dome layer. Change the color to white, then you can paint the small dots for snow. Don't make them perfect circles though. It will look more natural if you make them different sizes and shapes. And that's it. There's our lovely snow globe. If you'd like to try drawing a snow globe in a different style and learn how to animate it in Procreate, you can check out my 2-part tutorial, which I'll link to in the corner and in the description below. I hope you had fun with this process, and I hope you'll join me for all 12 days of this holiday painting practice. There's a link in the description for where you can download the free drawing templates and get a peek at all the drawings we'll be creating for the next 12 days. I've also added a link to the 12 Days of Christmas Drawings playlist so you can easily find all the content in this series. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love if you'd give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.